This episode brought to you by Café Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Café Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from? Welcome to the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt Lindelof.
And I'm Frida Wara. We are made stronger by story, and there's no better source than the continent's largest body of fresh water, Lake Superior.
So join us as we highlight the 5 national parks that ring this greatest of the Great Lakes, meet the people, tour the places, and learn about the projects that make these parks and body of water so remarkable.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
I'm Walt Lindelof.
And I'm Frida Wara.
And welcome once again to the Lake Superior Podcast.
Walt, we had such a great opportunity to chat with Drew Rush, Wyoming-based, but Lake Superior lover. He is just the amazing wildlife and natural history photographer with a passion for following wildlife in our national parks. And we are so fortunate that he has been to Isle Royale and really not just been there, but like really dug in and has had such a history with capturing so many of our amazing photos. And we talked with him a little bit earlier, back at the beginning of summer, because he was heading over there to basically harvest his footage from over the winter. And Drew, it's so wonderful to have you. So what did you end up finding out of all those memory cards that you collected? First of all, how many were there?
Oh, man, we had, somewhere in the neighborhood of something like 20 memory cards that we were kind of sifting through with cameras that were kind of positioned all over different parts of the island. And, we ended up getting some great stuff. I'm really surprised some of the cameras were still working when we picked them up. It was really exciting.
For our listeners.
We wanted to know, Drew, what were you doing? What project were you working on to get these photos, and what was it all about?
So, working with the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation to try and come up with footage of wolves specifically in relation to the reproduction there in the park that the foundation will be able to use for various aspects, whether it's educational films or material that the Park Service itself can use and things like that. And so we've been kind of identifying different areas of the park that are getting lots of use and putting out remote cameras. And we didn't have a chance to pick them up last winter. And when we picked them up, we were able to get a bunch of behavior, got great footage of uncollared wolves and things like that. So we were just really kind of excited with how well the cameras performed.
I do have to ask you, Drew, in terms of just with this progress and this process, going there, gathering them, obviously there's a certain amount of discovery of opening up and seeing what you got. What were some of the favorites? Maybe what were some of the things that struck you as really good particular images and moments that you were able to capture?
I think one of my favorite ones is probably some footage that shows a family group, a pack of wolves running around on one of the beaches there, and they stop and they kind of start playing in front of the camera. And it's just a chance, they're not really aware of any camera being present or anything like that. And, they're just wolves being wolves. They're chasing each other on the beach and rolling around on the ground and things like that. So it's just really kind of unique footage that you get to see, whether it's that or single wolf running by. It's just really exciting.
But that's also Drew Rush being him and knowing where to put that camera, because the idea that, wolves are not, they're so stealth. They know, but somehow you knew the right place to locate that camera in the first place.
That's one of the most fun parts of the whole thing, is really trying to kind of get out in front of them, and figure out where they're going to be. And some of those cameras didn't end up getting anything. And so we ended up pulling those and just kind of trying to focus more on the places that have really produced, some of the better images in the past. So we added a couple of cameras in those locations. I was also able to throw up another couple of still images cameras, the kind of like the high-end still images cameras, to kind of work getting some of those images in addition to getting some of the video stuff. Not only are we getting wolf stuff, but we're getting fox stuff. We're getting moose stuff. We get otters running through there. We get eagles.
We're talking with Drew Rush today. He's a photographer, wildlife photographer, about the project of recently going out to Isle Royale, getting photos, and now bringing them in. Drew, I'm curious, just from sort of what's rewarding for you about this? Obviously, the photography, there's a creative side to it, but like you said, trying to get in front of the animals you're trying to capture. Is that the rewarding part when it works? Is it when you get the good shot? What is it that Drew Rush gets a rush off of when he does this?
It's really tough to say. I mean, the process itself is so much fun, kind of things like that. But then also, going out in the way that you're exploring or finding out is just really, you have to be getting out there and getting after it to find that stuff. And that's also just incredibly fun and exciting when you find those places or when you think you find those places. So that's rewarding in itself. But then, you get the cameras and stuff like that working, and you start getting images coming back. And so that, that helps out too. But it's hard to kind of narrow down, one thing specifically that keeps me going. It's just kind of a whole mishmash of it, I guess.
How many cameras do you have out there now, Drew?
Right now we have 10 cameras out there.
Okay.
We have 10 video cameras, and we have 3 still cameras. Yeah.
And when is your plan to go collect those data cards?
I'm going to be going back at the first part of August. I've just been talking with a couple of people from the foundation here in the last couple of days, really trying to kind of narrow down that window as to when we can get out to the island. I have a couple of other projects that I'm working around timing-wise, and we're just trying to kind of get that dialed in, but it's looking like it's going to be around the first or second week of August.
That should be lovely. And I understand, because I did get a chance to catch up with Phyllis Green. I didn't get a chance to check in with Dave Miller yet, but Phyllis said, my goodness, when she was on that rocking boat and looking at everything that you were bringing it back in, and she was making sure right away that you can get all of those images cataloged and get them also duplicated, because that one-shot wonder, boy, you want to make sure that you held on to it in a couple different ways, for sure. I don't know how, should we call her Dramamine Debbie, or I don't know what it must have been like, to be on the water.
She was working away diligently. I would run out to the cameras and grab the memory cards and come back and then hand them off to Phyllis, and then hop back on the board and paddle out to go grab more cards and get that going. I mean, I think I had a 5 terabyte hard drive that was pretty close to full when we left of, images. And a lot of that is, unusable stuff. But man, the cameras really performed well. Like I said, some of the cameras, when I walked up to them to pick them up for the first time since I had set them out in October, still had battery left, battery power left in them. And we were still able to record stuff, all the way up until now. So it was just amazing.
Did you camouflage those cameras at all?
Any of the stuff that I make that involves metal, I will kind of paint and, I'll scuff it up or paint it just to try and kind of take the really bright shine off of it. Mm-hmm. But other than that, no, those cameras, the video cameras are painted camo already. And then the stills cameras are just kind of the cases are kind of a earthy color. So I just let them go.
For someone that's had a game camera, and for where Walt and I live, a lot of people have game cameras. Yeah, right. Well, how would you describe your video cameras as far as resolution difference from, what somebody's got looking at their bait pile or, at their deer blind?
Mm-hmm. Some of the cameras that we're using are really the same kind of off-the-shelf hunting cameras that you could buy. I use Browning 4K cameras. The files that those are producing now are just really amazing. They look fantastic. And then the other cameras that I use are Fuji cameras that can shoot either a 4K, more kind of like a film or video image, or a really nice, crisp, high-resolution stills image. And those cameras are just a little bit more advanced. They just have a little bit more features and things like that. But, we use a mix of both. And I always recommend to people that might want to get into it that they shouldn't hesitate to get one of those less expensive hunting kind of video cameras because, man, if the conditions are right, they produce really nice-looking images.
We're talking with Drew Rush today on the Lake Superior podcast. And of course, we're talking about his going and getting some of the photos and things from when we talked with him earlier about going out there and setting up the cameras and trying to get some wildlife, particularly wolves on Isle Royale. We kind of touched on it, Drew. You kind of mentioned some of the, the ones that really stuck with you, but give us a rundown, a couple of more of some really cool images that not only were you able to capture, but you kind of can't wait to get out there for people to check out.
Well, we were able to get a lot of stuff of wolves, just traveling around. We got just a great shot of a wolf that runs into frame on a trail and stops and gets just a perfect side profile view. And then another wolf comes in and kind of plays quickly, and then they both just kind of take off trotting into the distance. We got a fair amount of stuff like that where you can get really good looks at them, and kind of see the animals being animals and not necessarily reacting to the camera. Whether that's a wolf, running up and down the beach chasing another one trying to play, or just kind of moving from A to B. It was just a ton of that stuff. And then, again, you can't go out to the island without seeing moose. And the same goes for the cameras, too. I mean, we got some just incredible moose stuff. We got one that this little tiny bull moose is walking down to the lake right at sunset. And, I mean, the light is going crazy. It's just really pretty. And for that matter, we also got probably one of my favorite camera trap images that I've taken in a long time, this image of these two bull moose fighting on the beach. Right,
really? Wow.
Right in front of the camera.
Wow,
yeah.
That's got to be spectacular.
And in this corner,
I was so excited when I saw it,
weighing 400 pounds.
Yeah.
Drew, what did you think of the health? And I know you've got to be careful with, but we are all anxious to hear that we've got some new pups coming and, that it's worked. This whole relocation has worked. And of course, we had some very desperate wolves before we made the relocation because there hadn't been that, I guess, injection of a new gene pool to the families there. Did they look healthy? Do they look like they're getting enough to eat?
Absolutely. Yeah. Everything looked really good in terms of, what we saw on camera. The wolves looked super healthy. They saw we saw young, uncollared wolves on the camera, which we're believing would lead us to indicate that, those are wolves that have been born on the island that are, growing up to maturity. And on top of that, all of the footage that we've collected has been handed over to the Park Service at this point, so that it can be integrated with their camera trap research program that they have going on, identifying species use and things like that on the island. So, yeah, I mean, everything looked great, and the park was really excited to also see our footage so that they could kind of get a look at some of that, but then also add to the research that they're doing.
Yeah, I'm sure that's why Phyllis Green would sit on any rolling boat anywhere looking at those images, because her heart, of course, is anxious to see what the science, what you're doing, Drew, bless you. And I'm thinking also in my head here, because I've been out on my paddleboard and Lake Superior is so warm now, but it wasn't when you went. And I'm thinking, were you in a dry suit? Did you dunk at all? Was it?
No, I managed to stay dry the whole time, but every day is a new day on Lake Superior, so we'll see what happens on this next go round.
We're talking with Drew Rush today on the Lake Superior podcast. He's a photographer who's helping with documenting and photographing the wolf population and other animals on Isle Royale. Drew, one thing I find interesting in our conversation here today is that when I went into this originally talking with you before, Andy, it's reinforced this time, I was thinking still images were primarily your field with this, but video is a big component of that. What's kind of the interesting part of working in video for you in this, and also what's sort of the creativity that you can exercise with video as opposed to a still photo?
I definitely gravitate towards trying to produce the still image. I think that it is just a lot more difficult to produce something that really speaks to people with a still image, and I really appreciate that process and that challenge. Video, my use of video was really born out of a frustration that it takes so long to produce one of those images that, if you were just looking to use still images, you could starve to death because it takes so long between stuff. So, I started using those smaller cameras, those kind of hunting cameras, as ways to research an area to figure out if a wolf, for example, would be going exactly where I thought. And then I started thinking, well, I could use this video to engage people. And then I started kind of posting that online and putting it out there. And people love seeing that stuff. It's kind of like a behind-the-scenes nature, if you will. And, so that started engaging people, and I just kind of started rolling with it, and it snowballed from there. And now it takes up at least half of the idea when I'm thinking about a project of how can I shoot video and show people this animal's behavior.
One thing I wanted to ask you then is it kind of dovetails into that is if people want to see some of your work, they want to see some of the pictures that you've taken, maybe when the pictures start to come out from this, but other stuff that you've done, how can they see your work?
The best way for me is on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Drew T. Rush. And, that's where pictures and videos coming out. But, also a lot of kind of another fun way that we really try to engage people is with some of the behind-the-scenes stuff also, where, we can show people how we're trying to come up with this content, whether it's, going out to the island and how we're looking around, or site-specific stuff where we can say, well, we're trying to set up a camera here and we're looking to try and do this, and it just kind of brings people into the experience a little bit. So Instagram's a great place. And then also always the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation is fantastic about putting that stuff up on their Facebook page, website, and their Instagram feed as well.
Drew, when you're shooting the videos or when the videos are activated, what starts them rolling and then what ends them rolling? What do you have? Is there some kind of trigger?
Sure. Yep, there's a infrared trigger that gets tripped when the animal walks in front of, wherever that sensor is placed. And then generally it's a setting within that system as to how long it will be recording, for anywhere from, say, like 10 seconds to a minute or even longer. Most of the time I have my stuff set to record for roughly about a minute. If you think about a film or something like that where you see an animal walking around, hardly ever is it really a whole minute of the animal doing something without getting cut. But for social media and things like that, people will definitely watch, 30 seconds or a minute of something unique. So.
One thing, Drew, I'm curious here from the standpoint of, obviously, as a photographer, you have a creative side to this. And when you're doing sort of the capturing of the image in this way that is remote, how big of a role are your compositional skills, your editing skills, to be able to make these really into truly striking photography? And how does that, how does that work for you in terms of your creative energy?
Sure. That's, I think, probably one of, I get a lot of questions from younger people that are trying to get into camera trap stuff as well. And that's a big one. And I think the composition is probably the hardest thing to nail, because, you could take a camera out and say, here's a game trail that something is going to walk on, and throw it up and, get some stuff. But it's another one to spend the time to find those locations where, it all kind of makes sense. And I always tell people to get a picture of an animal in the landscape that it lives in, where everything is kind of firing on all cylinders, and you can read all of that just by looking at the images, next to impossible.
Right.
And so I'll spend as much time as I can just looking at areas and just looking at places, trying to find that composition and to find that spot where you're going to say the wolf is going to stand there, and you can see the shoreline, and you can see the lighthouse in the distance, and the aurora is going to be right here. You know what I mean? To try and get all of that to line up. But when it does, it just feels amazing. There's nothing like it.
Drew, I'm imagining right now in my head, because you planted those cameras last fall, didn't get an opportunity to get there till May. So let's just say in that 6 months time, the sun moves probably 20 degrees off the horizon, because you're at 48 degrees latitude or something at Isle Royale, maybe 49. I'm not really sure what that exact latitude would be, but you're lighting, because that's something you can't recreate that either. I mean, it's going to happen. The sun that you get in March is so different than what you get in November.
Well, the smaller cameras do a really good job of kind of auto correcting or auto adjusting, and then the bigger cameras that I'm kind of using for the stills, those I started shooting those with what we call prime lenses, which are just kind of really trying to maximize the amount of light that they're letting into the camera, and then also a fixed focal length, and it ends up just kind of producing a crisper, sharper image. And the cameras are so good now that we can shoot these. I'm starting to shoot this stuff without flashes.
Oh, really?
And that has just been really kind of exhilarating and liberating to be able to know that the technology would be able to support creating just images that haven't really existed, at least as far as I'm concerned, before this project, because we're not using flashes, because the cameras can support such a dynamic range of color and light and all of that stuff.
We're talking with Drew Rush today on the Lake Superior podcast. I'm Walt Lindelof, Rita Wara over there with us. And we're talking about, with Drew Rush, these photos that have been, in effect, harvested from being out in cameras and capture cameras on Isle Royale. Again, when these start to kind of come out more and everything, let's give everybody again how they can find some of those online, Drew, and especially your other work, so they can see what you've been doing. That, again, is through your Instagram, and which is what?
Instagram handle is Drew T. Rush, and website, you could also see some stuff on the website at drewrush.com. But then, of course, National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, social media, and webpage is probably the best place to see that stuff, because they're kind of, constantly sifting through it and looking for stuff that they can use to educate folks with. So.
Drew, you have to share this story, because a little bird told me, who was visiting with me, that one of the highlights of the trip was actually when you didn't have your camera, you were making your way back to the boat, and you had a really cool encounter. And I guess you did run back to get your camera? Share with our listeners what happened.
Well, so it was the last day of our trip out there, which was kind of a whirlwind trip. We had been moving the fastest I think, that we'd ever done out there. And we pulled up to our last spot to go check the last camera traps that we had out. And I hopped on the board and I started paddling over, and it was super foggy when we were there. And I kind of came up to the shoreline, and through the fog, I made out a cow moose. And then all of a sudden, next to her, she had just given birth to a little calf.
Wow.
And it had stood up and she started licking it, cleaning it off, and then it kind of fed for the first time there. And I just sat there because she was giving birth basically right next to where I had this camera.
That's spectacular.
And so it was amazing. So I kind of just sat off in the water for a minute, and then I figured, well, I'll go get the long lens. So I turned around and zipped back to the boat and grabbed the long lens and paddled back. And when I got back there, she was still kind of licking it clean, and it was still just kind of wobbling around right there. And then she laid down, and it just kind of hung out and laid down next to her. And I figured, well, I'll go check that camera later. I got some pictures and turned around and got out of there.
Well, that's really a wonderful story. That kind of drives it all home, doesn't it, Drew? That this is the opportunity. You're capturing this for people that may sometimes never in their lives see or experience this, which is the other level of these as photos, aren't they, Drew?
That's exactly right. It just feels great to be able to try and show people what a special place it is, you know what I mean? And put stuff out there that I know resonates with folks that love the island and love the national park system.
Well, Drew, it's been a pleasure having you back with us with the story. Again, for folks, the timeline was you put these cameras out there when?
They went out in October, the beginning of October last year.
And then you went to go get them?
Yeah, they stayed all winter. Our plan was to go back in the middle of the winter, but COVID kind of interrupted that, and so they ended up having to stay out there the whole time until May when we got out there.
Well, looking forward to seeing some of these. And Drew, we certainly appreciate your time today on the program. So thank you again, man.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Well, it is Drew Rush, wildlife photographer, joining us, giving us a recap of that adventure of putting those cameras out there. And that's kind of the thing, too, is Frida is talking about putting them out there in October with the idea of going and picking them up sometime in a few months, and then you couldn't. And you go back out there and you find out, and they made it and they lasted and they were even running, some of them. That's actually really something.
The science he's collected for us, Walt, and having a 5 terabyte hard drive for us to be left on is just, really amazing. And we're just so grateful that he is one, we always think about hunting with your camera, you're looking for that shot, but truly the level that he goes to get his images, and then the reward at the end of
the research and all of the things that he's doing. Where do I put the camera? And I check this and I check that, and then hope for the best, and then also use your other skills that he possesses, which is editing and setting up the image and making sure. But the ability to catch these the wild animals, the wolves, the moose, the beavers, whatever it is, the eagles, in a way that they are not affected by either the person being there to take the camera or the camera itself, catching them in that true natural state really makes for some wonderful images.
It makes me want to think about our listeners. Let's just try today. Everybody take your cell phone and see if you can catch one of those images of your dog or your cat.
Without it being affected.
Oh, my goodness. Just imagine.
Well,
wow.
We certainly appreciate Drew joining us. We appreciate you all joining us for another edition of the Lake Superior podcast. That's going to do it for us. We appreciate you listening. I'm Walt Lindelof.
I'm Frida Warren. I invite you to go to the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation Facebook. Get some more images of these stories that we're sharing with you. And if you have anything to comment or stories that you hope we would get to, Walt and I are happy to find out a little bit more about this great big blue that we all have on this planet.
Let us know. And we thank you all for listening in with us today on the Lake Superior podcast. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
The National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, NPLSF, is the only official nonprofit 501c3 fundraising partner of the National Park Service for all 5 U.S. National Park sites on Lake Superior.
To learn more about NPLSF projects and programs, you can visit the website at nplsf.org or friend them on Facebook.
I'm Frida Wara.
And I'm Walt Lindola. Thanks for listening to the Lake Superior Podcast.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
This episode brought to you by Café Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Café Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?